welcome to the Travel and Tourism webinar by the Singapore Tourism Board in collaboration with LinkedIn. The world of travel and tourism has changed dramatically, and we know that many local businesses are facing challenges due to COVID-19. To help you get ready for the new norm, the Singapore Tourism Board and LinkedIn have collaborated on a program to help you drive engagement, to stay relevant, and to help your brand stand out. I hope you find it useful. Stay safe and have a good learning journey.
Good morning, and welcome to our webinar, Building a COVID-19 Content Strategy. My name is Olivia Kane, and I'm the Senior Content Solutions Consultant here at LinkedIn, where it's my job to help consult our customers on how they can develop great content for LinkedIn and also build their own content strategy. Thank you so much, STB, for having me today, and let's dive in. A couple of housekeeping notes. Q&A will actually be at the end of the webinar, so please drop any questions that you may have throughout the presentation into our chat. We'll hopefully get to your question towards the end, given the time permitting. You will also be placed on auto mute, and we will be recording this session. So the deck and the link to this presentation will be shared to you afterwards. And also, please stay tuned for our 2-minute survey at the end of this presentation. We would love to hear some of your feedback and thoughts on the webinar today. Now, onto our agenda. What will we be covering in the next 45 minutes? So first and foremost, we want to dive in a little bit closer in terms of what the current travel and tourism climate looks like. How has COVID-19 impacted the travel and tourism industry? Number 2, building a COVID-19 content strategy. We need to help you make sure that you can create the best messaging and the best content strategy for your customers to make sure that we get through this crisis together. And lastly, best practices to drive your message and to engage your audience. How do you stand out in the feed and we don't end up swimming in the sea of sameness? I think we are all in this position where we're planning for digital transformation, whether it was weeks, months, years away, until COVID-19 came along. I think COVID-19 has definitely perpetuated and moved forward digital transformation efforts across any organization and across all industries. And with this, for the travel and tourism industry, social media marketing is more important now than ever. And there are 3 reasons why. We need to make sure that we're continuously nurturing the customer experience. We need to ensure that we're strengthening relationships with your brand firsthand. How do we make sure that we keep the conversations going during this time of crisis and also start building a resolution, or how do we start building our messaging and our content strategy for when things seem to get better and restrictions seem to ease? Next, create demand. How do we stay top of mind so our customers can quickly make decisions as soon as these restrictions ease? How do we make sure that the demand actually still maintains through this period when there may not actually be as much outright demand due to the restrictions that we are experiencing? And then also, we mustn't forget that right now is a time to innovate. We need to be bold as brands, as organizations or corporations, or even as a travel and tourism industry to take advantage of this time to digitize your efforts. We need to make sure that we are able to test and learn and also be okay to actually fail. We need to know how we can grow from this experience, since a lot of our other organizations are in the same boat. So ultimately, COVID-19 has actually changed the way we use the internet, and we need to really keep this in the front of our minds when creating content and also keeping our communications alive. So let's talk a little bit about the current climate, what's happening in the world around us, although many of us do know, and specifically for the travel and tourism industry. I'd like to first bring forward the 6 stages of a crisis. I think we're obviously in the middle of the crisis right now, but it's also good to understand where do we actually go from here, especially in the recovery and the follow-up period. But first, let's go to the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about the anxiety, the triggers, and also how a crisis actually escalates. Now, in these first two phases, this is really about adapting. Our audiences, our organizations, our corporations are trying to figure out how they can adapt as quickly as possible to a fast escalating crisis. And this is where a lot of uncertainty comes. And what you might see is a lot of organizations freeze their messaging during this time, waiting to see what other organizations are going to be doing, or if there's just more clarity on the situation. Once you actually enter the crisis is really about how you survive. How do you actually understand the new normal as a crisis is unfolding and the peak may be reached? And this is incredibly important because this is actually when you should definitely have your messaging and your content strategy in place so you can actually help your audience or help your customers survive and thrive during this crisis and also adjust to the new normal. Next, we have recovery. Recovery comes, of course, after the crisis. So how are we planning for this? Do you all have content strategies that are already addressing a recovery period? Well, I'm going to give you some ideas today on how we can also start thinking about that. As we know, 90% of the world's population live in countries with travel restrictions, and this is by far the worst crisis that the international tourism has faced since the records began in 1950. And this says a lot. And this has definitely heavily impacted the travel and tourism industry. Well, although there's a lot of doom and gloom with this statistic, there is a lot of hope, and this actually creates a huge opportunity to use this time to innovate and create very effective content strategies and also engage with your customers in a new way than ever before. What we do know is tourist numbers could fall 60 to 80% in 2020, and experts do see that there will be a recovery period of at least 10 months to potentially over a year. The first that will actually recover will be domestic demand and most certainly leisure travel. At least that's what experts are predicting. Leisure travel will take priority over business since a lot of corporations will stay conservative in allowing their employees to travel. And in this graph, what you can see here is various scenarios on how the travel and tourism industry could be recovering in 3 different time frames. You have scenario 1 and 2, where it's going to be a little bit more sooner rather than later. It's not quite as conservative as an approach as compared to scenario 3. Scenario 3 indicates that there's only going to be some sort of stability happening from December onwards. And I think we need to also take note that Asia Pacific is actually expected to rebound first, as experts have noticed. And these are the 3 various scenarios. I think it's safe to say that scenario 1 potentially won't be happening in our region. And we're looking closer to scenario 2 or 3 with September or December with some sort of stabilization being reached. I think the point of this slide is that we need to think about the long term. There is a very long runway from now until September or even December. How are we planning our communications and our content around this? What does our strategy look like? What's the plan? And I think this is really sharing insight that we're in this for the long haul. With that, it's really interesting to see that our audiences or our potential customers really want to hear from us too. So that way we also know that we're not quite being tone deaf or insensitive to their needs, because actually brands should have a voice and communicate during social media, live streaming, and advertising during this time of crisis. In fact, it's expected. 44% of respondents are actually spending more time on social media because of the virus. We're leaning into our social media, into our digital lives or digital worlds more than ever because we want to stay connected. We want to stay connected to the brands that we love, the people that we love, and also we're social human beings. So we need to try and find different ways where we can interact with each other. I think another interesting statistic here is that 73% of respondents agree that brands should advertise as normal or have no opinion. I think advertising as normal should definitely be the thing that we're looking at here, because what we want to ensure is that we actually demonstrate some sort of compassion or acknowledging the crisis that is at hand. And 30% of respondents say that social media should be provided during instead, or provide live streaming instead of events at this time. So again, it's tying back to the need of, okay, we may not be able to meet in person, so what's the digital alternative, and how are you as an organization facilitating this for your customers so they can engage with you? Member engagement on coronavirus has increased sharply in recent months, rather. We saw an engagement growth rate of over 1,000%. And also, article growth grew by 719%. So what you can see here is, again, there is that leaning in to consume more content and also to create content in and around this crisis. I think at the end of the day, we need to think of content as the constant through any crisis. Content is really the glue to any form of communication because it's content that actually delivers the right messaging to your audiences. And with this, it can drive incredible impact and it can drive great brand synergy for you and your audience. So at the end of the day, we need to think content first. How are we actually going to deliver the right information at the right time to the right audience? Because what we need to focus on is that since audiences are leaning into content more than ever, we need to ensure that we stay present and stay relevant. We need to stay top of mind. Now is not the time to actually switch off our communications, turn down budgets, because that way we can make sure that we can build that brand affinity in the future. A significant body of research suggests that significantly reducing ad spend in a recession has negative long-term impact on brands in terms of sales, market share, growth, and return on investment. Companies that maintained investment recovered a lot more quickly. So ergo, we must stay present, we have to stay relevant so we can stay top of mind and be the first port of call for when the lights switch back on or restrictions actually ease. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about building a COVID-19 content strategy. What does that look like and what are the key elements that are involved? First, let's take a look at what we've actually been seeing across the landscape. You may have seen these across various social platforms, across the internet. I think these are incredible campaigns that really pack a punch and they drive a lot of impact. These are messages of hope and reassurance for audiences, and it all has that very unanimous tone of we care for you and also we want you to stay safe, so come and visit us when you can and when things actually lighten up. And I think that's really, really important for this time, that we were in that sea of sameness in terms of having a very unanimous message. But this is just a campaign. Literally, as soon as the budgets were finished on these pieces of content, they disappeared. How do you actually continue the conversation with your potential customers? And also, although these were incredibly impactful, it doesn't really keep either the Maldives or visiting Australia top of mind. So how do we actually ensure that we continue the conversation with our audiences? And I think what happened here in the next couple of examples was an indication of that slight always-on approach. The W Hotel was trying to recreate some of their very brand-worthy experiences from the comforts of your home, and Club Med wanted to talk to parents as well, carving out a niche during this time period. But again, these feel like one-off campaigns or one-off stunts where a lot of budget actually went into so they can actually drive that audience penetration, hit them with a bit of awareness, but then ultimately, what was the follow-up action after this? So this begs the question, campaigns versus always on. Campaigns is like what you saw earlier. There were these very big, very shiny, big budgeted pieces of content that rolled out to a mass audience, and then they actually had a specific time span of when they were actually live. Whereas always on is just that. Your content is always on. You're always talking to your audience and you're always engaging with them with content that is drip fed on a daily, monthly, or weekly basis. The lights don't turn off. And the reason why always on is so important is because you want to defend your share of voice. You want to cut ad spend risks that could potentially damage your market share. Investing in ad spend during a recession actually brings long-term advantage. Once you decline or experience a decline in market share and it actually sets in, it's very, very difficult to reverse. So going dark can actually weaken consumer bonding metrics. So although big shiny campaigns with very high level messaging is important, we need to understand what happens after that. How are you speaking and engaging with your audience post these bright and beautiful campaigns? So when we're thinking of a content strategy and building that always-on approach, you need to look at three factors. One, understanding your audience. This is the most important and should be every single starting point for any content strategy. Who are they? What do they want? And what are they actually experiencing during this time of crisis? Next is building your pillars. How do you actually create a framework for the content that you want to roll out? How do you identify key topics that are relevant to your audience at this time? So I'm going to show you core pillars that we have seen resonated on our platform that you can leverage for your content strategy. And then next, we need to get creative. Let's ensure that your content is going to stand out and not blend in on the newsfeed. So let's talk about understanding your audience. Understanding your audience is incredibly important, as I mentioned before. I think when you think about different social platforms, they actually have a different purpose, or I go into them with a very different intent. With Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I like to lean back and consume content in a passive fashion. And essentially, this content is a break and it's a form of entertainment for me. Whereas LinkedIn is a platform that I lean into. I actually want to accomplish a specific task rather than kill time. I want to actually gain value. I want to learn something that can help my productivity. So when you're creating content or developing your content pillars and your content strategy, you need to bear in mind the different audience intent for each of these platforms. So rather than actually having blanket content across all social media platforms, you need to hand-pick content for each social platform that suits your audience intent. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everything professional cannot live on Facebook or everything entertainment-wise cannot live on LinkedIn. You just need to be very selective. Also, LinkedIn is a platform where you want to drive value, and you need to ensure that your content meets that objective. So I'm going to introduce to you the benefit ladder. The benefit ladder is a technique to help us get to the heart of what our customers want. It's really the articulation of value that can shape your go-to market messaging throughout a crisis. And this benefit ladder is helping you move your messaging from being very brand-centric to being very audience-centric. And I will walk you through how we do just that. First and foremost, when you're building your benefits ladder, you need to start with your customer, your audience. You need to understand who you're trying to target. What are their demographics? What are their needs? What are their enemies? And what are key insights that really flesh out that you know who you're speaking to? This is really answering the who in the who, what, where, when, why. Once you've established your target audience and who you want to target with your content, you can move up the rung to talk about product features. What does your product do? Product-focused strengths, any kind of claims, unique offerings, or point of differences is really key here. This is really focusing about the what. What does your product do in the functionality sense of the word? And often, this is actually where we stop when we think about our messaging, when we create content for our audiences. We usually just talk about our product. We want to sell products or we want to sell an experience. Next, once we've established what our product actually does for our audience, we move up and talk about the functional benefits. What do our consumers get? And this is where we start thinking about how to create consumer-based content or consumer-centric content. Because we need to start putting on the hat of the consumer in terms of how they actually experience our product and services. So let's put on the hat of your consumer and answer the question, well, what do I get? What do I get from your product? And start listing this out. Once you finish listing out the functional benefits of your product features, then we move into probably the hardest rung of the ladder, which is the emotional benefits. How does it actually make your audience feel? What are the emotions that are tagged to the functional and the product benefits that we're seeing? And I think really we need to dive into this even deeper than ever before, because we need to also make sure that not only is our content audience centric, but it feels human. And when you tap into the emotional benefits of your product or your service, then you're able to start communicating on this level. And like I mentioned before, we usually stop at product features. This is the tactical, very, very easy go-to-market messaging for any organization. And I really want to challenge you to start thinking about the functional and even the emotional benefits of your products and services so you can craft very empathetic and compassionate messaging during this time of crisis. So I did an example with Singapore Airlines, and let's walk through how we can build a benefit ladder and how simple it is for this organization. So let's start at the bottom rung. Who am I? Their target audience is really middle to upper middle first class who prioritize high quality service and comfort over price. They're college educated and frequent business travelers. The product features. So what do I get essentially when I book a Singapore Airlines ticket? Newly fitted aircrafts, excellent service on the ground and air. It's pretty seamless from end to end, and a very polished flying experience that is a cut above the rest and incredibly reliable. And the customer benefits. So what solution does it actually solve for me? Well, I can essentially travel to the best destinations in the world with a touch of sophistication. It's relatively relaxing. There's an element of luxury and also safety in comparison to other airlines in the region or even globally. So ultimately, I get access to some of the best destinations, and I get to do it in a very comfortable way. So how does it make me feel? So this is also, again, a challenge to tap into for the audience. I feel cared for. I'm taken care of from end to end, and it actually feels like a treat. Flying is often a challenge for most people, and it's also not always the easiest or most enjoyable experience. But with Singapore Airlines, it's actually a joy to fly with them, and it feels a little bit sophisticated. I understand they understand my need for excellent quality at every touch point. And I think this is how you can actually start crafting content. Once you start thinking about the emotional benefits of your products or your services, you're then able to create content pillars and make sure that you're able to communicate in a very human way. So this is an example of the benefit ladder, working our way up, or you can even try working your way down if you wanted an added challenge to see how you can actually build more customer-centric messaging during this time of crisis. And I highly encourage that you take on this exercise for your organization as well. Now, we've taken a closer look at our audience. We understand their intent when they enter different platforms. And then we've also understood what our product benefits are and what their emotional needs are, so we can start crafting content and organizing it in pillars. So when we build a framework for our content, these are some example content pillars that you can actually consider during times of uncertainty. We've actually pulled these content pillars together from insights from our platform to ensure that these topics are relatable, conversational, and they're also adhering to the times. So these are 3 content pillars. You can choose to take the option of actually leveraging all 3 or maybe 1 or 2 for your content strategy. But we've seen that these content buckets are actually very effective in understanding ways to communicate with your audience during a time of crisis. So these are all also emotionally driven as well. So you can actually tie in any emotional benefit that you've learned from your benefits ladder exercise and start channeling this up into the content pillar exercise. The first content pillar that we recommend that you create content or leverage some of these topics is actually managing your audience through change. How are you helping your audience navigate through this period of crisis? Well, there are 3 ways that you can do that, or 3 topics that you can tap into, which is culture, productivity, and learning. Again, how do you actually draw from the insights of your benefits ladder exercise and inject any of that messaging, those emotions into these core topics? Next is leading with trust. How is your leadership or is your organization leading the charge when it comes to this crisis? How are they changing? How are they showcasing that they're reliable and also demonstrating transparency and keeping up with their corporate responsibility as well? So these are great content or topic ideas to leverage in times of a crisis. Next is adapting to drive business continuity. This one is key and probably one of the easiest content pillars to leverage because you can actually pull in your executive leadership to showcase any kind of messaging and to give highlights and recommendations and even updates of what they're actually doing for the crisis. Now more than ever, the purpose test is actually coming to a lot of organizations and also to a lot of CEOs. Our execs are becoming front and center because that is who we're relying on to really steer the ship through the crisis. Customer centricity. Again, tie in your learnings from the benefits ladder to see how you can draw some emotional benefits and build customer-centric content and also products and solutions. And then lastly, safety and reassurance. In order to drive business continuity, you need to also demonstrate that you're practicing safety and reassurance for your audiences. Now let's talk a little bit more about each of these topics and give some examples of what kind of content you can actually create. So when you're talking about culture, when managing your audience compassionately through change, also think about your employees. They're your audience too. And how can you actually display your culture and how your culture has either changed or even gotten stronger during times of a crisis? And you can promote or talk about your social events. You can recognize great work while working from home, showcase how you bring your culture and values into this context. Next is productivity. I think, again, think about the audience intent when you come to LinkedIn. You want to share productivity hacks, tips, and tricks from your internal experts and even your employees. They're incredible experts that are right at your fingertips. So leverage them and create content from that and showcase how you or your organization is staying productive during this time. And also adapting your products and services so your audience or customers or employees can be more successful. Again, this matches the intent as to why members access LinkedIn as a platform as well. Now for learning is key because a lot of us are taking this time for self-development. So are there any curated, really interesting online courses that you can create for your audience or curate for your audience, especially if you're in hospitality, for example? Could you share some online courses for anyone who's aspiring to be in hospitality one day or studying or share any kinds of behind the scenes content, educational industry reports or white papers, or even conduct trainings? Again, this is going to be a great way for users to engage with your brand. A couple of awesome examples that I came across LinkedIn. I love this example from Kayak. Kayak is also demonstrating transparency in its best form because in this piece of content, they're actually showcasing or talking about that they see every challenge as an opportunity to improve their site or app. So what they did was they consolidated all these incredible tools to help travelers get ready for future trips. Again, this keeps Kayak top of mind that they're staying ahead of the curve when it comes to this crisis, creating content, optimizing their platform, so that then builds trust and reliability. I will think of them when I want to book my first trip once restrictions ease. And it's also really nailing on their brand promise. But I like what Shangri-La Group did here was that they were talking about working from home as a parent. And that's incredibly challenging, and I think quite a unanimous statement as well. So what's really lovely with this piece of content was that they wanted to crowdsource tips and tricks on how to work from home as a parent. And I think this is a really great way to engage with your audience during this time when you otherwise would be promoting your products or services. Instead, this really builds a conversation. Mandarin Oriental Hotel Group did a beautiful video highlighting their employees. Again, your employees are your audience too. And this is celebrating them and everything that they're doing and all of their initiatives, whether it's remote or digital. And I really like this spin that Mandarin Oriental Hotel Group wanted to bring their employees front and center and how they're embracing this virtual way of functioning as an organization. Changi Airport Group did a really interesting post that talked about encouraging the airport community. Although airports are definitely taking a very, very different tone at the moment, since they're very, very quiet, I think this is a great way to keep the encouragement up. And again, it's a conversation. It's how do you keep things going? How do you keep the lights on of your organization and share a little bit of behind the scenes to really demonstrate your culture and demonstrate, how we can be there for each other in times of crisis. Next, we'll talk about leading with trust. Demonstrate what drives your company to make your audience be part of the mission to tackle the existing landscape. And a couple of key topics here, or key ways that you can actually communicate that, is through reliability. How are you connecting with customers and employees in a place that they can trust? How are you being open about current challenges and celebrating how your brand is innovating in this time of uncertainty? I think being open about current challenges is really, really key, and we need to be fearless in this endeavor. Transparency. Are we speaking directly to prospects about challenging topics? And how are you joining conversations with your customers? Although you may want to put a piece of content out there that is asking for customer engagement, but how are you actually speaking back to them? It needs to be a two-way conversation, because a lot of these crowdsourcing or commenting like posts are just actually one way. And if you want to think about or look at a company that does this extremely well, check out Netflix and what they're doing across their social platforms. They are brilliant in actually joining conversations and speaking with their customers. And also, I can't stress this enough, but you have to understand the most pressing topics for your customers in order to shape your content. So understanding topics means that you're listening, you're reading, you're actually tuning in and speaking with your audience during this time, so you can craft messaging that is right and also that is not tone deaf. For example, I did a recent poll on LinkedIn where I asked, do the words uncertain and unprecedented times, is that still relevant in our messaging right now? And the majority of respondents actually said no. So we want to move away from using those kind of buzzwords, and now I know how to tweak my messaging when I speak to my audience. So even running polls is also very key, and you can also do this on LinkedIn as a platform. Corporate responsibility. We can share commitments that you're supporting your community. How do we ensure that you or your corporate responsibility strategy has pivoted in this time of crisis? And I think you can craft thought leadership on industry trends and how your brand is actually supporting the community during this time. One of my favorite examples is Tourism New Zealand. Tourism New Zealand is actually taking this time when there, of course, won't be any tourism at all in their country, and they're going to be reinventing what the tourism sector looks like. They want to redesign the tourism sector that enriches their people and their home. So they're crowdsourcing. They're really reinventing the wheel here, which I think is very, very clever. And they want to rebuild the future of tourism and engaging their partners to do so. What an amazing initiative and what an amazing opportunity that have come through this time of crisis. What you can see here is Cathay Pacific Airways has taken on a different approach. You're actually seeing how they pivot and adapt their servicing to meet the needs of the COVID-19 climate. And this is a beautiful behind the scenes video on how they're doing just that. Again, it's showcasing a lot of transparency and also corporate responsibility on how they're supporting their community. Pico Group did an excellent job in pivoting their business in general, because they actually, of course, thrive in hosting person-to-person events, but now they actually had to activate their digital arm very, very quickly. So they came out with a strong messaging, which is event canceled. Well, you can actually do it virtually, and they're enabling that and innovating in this space. So by offering a digital option for their key customers, I think this is also showcasing how they're leading the charge. KLM did something very interesting where they actually wanted to showcase that their corporate responsibility just doesn't stop because COVID-19 has hit them, and they wanted to really demonstrate that they're here for their community. If you're ever looking for inspiration around very heartfelt, very honest, very human content, check out KLM and how they actually package their messaging. Now, lastly, the last content pillar that I think could be really important if you include in any content strategy during this COVID times is really talking about how to adapt to drive business continuity. You want to showcase and signal your values and lead the charge to meet evolving customer needs. And this is key because this crisis is fast evolving and your audience is actually evolving just as quickly as the crisis itself. So you need to constantly be adapting your messaging. Executive leadership is really, really important during this time. This is how your execs can actually take control of the narrative around their business and industry and also showcase leadership. We need to also highlight and demonstrate a thoughtful and authentic voice. And when we use our execs and actually create videos or blog posts with their voice, that also creates some brand authenticity and also builds a sense of connectedness among your customer community. Now, customer centricity is key. Through the benefits ladder, we were able to explore how to actually move our brand-centric messaging to be a little bit more customer-centric. So how do we practice this in a tactical way? We can keep customers informed with up-to-date websites and information around the crisis. This is key. Now, whenever I go to any kind of travel and tourism website, I'm always looking for where is the latest on the COVID situation, and that has to be easy to navigate. It's incredibly important to listen and read what customers are saying to effectively support them and partner with them. And we need to do this so we can adapt our messaging accordingly. Because like I said, this is a fast evolving crisis, and also our audiences are evolving just as quickly as the crisis is, and so should our messaging. So we need to provide turnkey resources to our customers. Safety and reassurance is incredibly important because as the travel and tourism sector will begin to open once restrictions ease, the first thing on every consumer's mind is going to be, am I safe? And also, will I be reassured about my health and safety? So how are we sharing step-by-step plans to address the current changes and also current challenges and also the road to recovery? How do we connect with customers virtually and conduct our business or our usual state of business in a digital way? So we need to make sure that you are practicing what you're preaching in terms of safety and reassurance. A couple of great examples that I've seen across LinkedIn as a platform is this partnership with Orange County government for the Visit Orlando page. I love this initiative that they want to really engage and drive business continuity for small businesses across their county. And they actually built a hashtag or a content series around the 407 Dates campaign, which is really all about supporting local businesses. So how can you have date nights with your partners, leveraging restaurants where you can buy flowers and candy and virtual events and musical performances? So I love that they're bringing people together, although we're in isolation, to really engage with the community. And this is a great way to perpetuate a sense of business continuity. Alaska Airlines address their audience directly from the president with actions that they are taking. And this feels very genuine, very authentic, and very, very human. It really showcases that Alaska Airlines took the extra step to engage their execs, to share their safety commitment. And also, I really like the messaging in this piece of content where it puts the actual ownership onto the audience. This feels very customer-centric when you're saying in the messaging, our safety commitment to you when you're ready to fly. It's not about when Alaska Airlines is ready to fly. This is really putting the audience in the driver's seat. And this is also what I mean by creating customer-centric content. So we've talked a lot about how to create content pillars today and how to understand our audience in this current context. And that's incredibly important. We need to make sure that if you haven't actually created a content strategy to address COVID, you're already falling behind. If you have decided to freeze your content, freeze your budget, or freeze any sort of marketing efforts, then you also may be behind the curve. We actually need to be rolling forward at this point with all of our messaging. But one thing we also need to consider, besides creating content for today, is also for tomorrow. How do we prepare our audience for the future state? What does the road to recovery look like? And how are we planning for it? What are our content pillars that we want to create for the recovery phase? we actually also need to start thinking about that now, not when recovery actually hits, because there are some indications and that experts have shared that we can actually start thinking about for our content strategy for tomorrow. A couple of content ideas to help plan for recovery. So there's potentially going to be a staycation revival because domestic travel and internal tourism will take precedence over anything international. We can also learn from the Australia bushfires and their recovery plan when it came to how they wanted to inject their industries. So they wanted to really focus on small businesses and putting them back on their feet. So there was a huge push for domestic travel and internal tourism. There also will be an emphasis on small family events and gatherings. As restrictions ease, this is probably where we're going to start first, before mass concerts and festivals, any sort of mass gathering will take place, or even conferences. We also need to help prepare our customers. Always sharing tips and tricks. What kind of hacks can we share? Because honestly, this is what people come to LinkedIn for. How do you help your customers become more successful and more productive? And by sharing really cool tips and tricks, whether it's from a health and safety perspective, whether it's from a travel perspective, you need to make sure that you are partnering with your audience along this journey and also from the crisis through to recovery. This could be travel tips and tricks. This could be packing tips and tricks, different to-do lists or how-to lists. Anything that could be relevant from your area of expertise will be of value to your customer. Also, ground travel will take precedence over air travel. And this is really important because air travel may look a little bit different. Experts do predict that there will be travel bubbles establishing, whereas it's countries that have reciprocated agreements or even COVID status that will open up their borders to each other first. So you won't actually see massive regions opening up as a whole. It's going to be very selective countries that will have reciprocated travel agreements in these little bubbles. And also, you need to start thinking about how you want to showcase your customers' health will be protected. I think this is incredibly key, and also it needs to be a constant topic that you're going to be addressing in your recovery content strategy. So just to touch on a couple of things that we highlighted, we need to ensure that we are a trusted source for the latest information and advisories. We need to share content that meet health advisory guidelines, live stream, even COVID-19 sensitive issues. So this is even getting to a more tactical level. How do we make sure that we're not only facilitating digital engagements, but our messaging actually meets the COVID-19 sensitivity? So for example, if you're creating content, you need to make sure that it's not with groups of people, that everyone is practicing social distancing, for example. We need to be very sensitive even on that tactical level during this time. Also, we need to support local businesses through takeout, gift certificates, and memberships. This is a fantastic way to help drive business continuity when we're thinking about what kind of content to create for that pillar. Also, keep your brand lights on. Don't go silent or switch off. Now is not the time to freeze. You actually need to be doubling down on your content efforts, whether that is via organic or paid initiatives. So at the end of the day, don't practice a campaign mindset. Practice an always-on mindset when it comes to your content strategy. And also, you need to start planning for eventual recovery now. What does that look like for your brand and services? Start mapping out topics or content pillars and start polling your audience or asking about what the future actually looks like. So now we've covered knowing your audience and also how you can build your content pillars with some content topic suggestions. Now let's focus on how we can actually get creative and stand out in the newsfeed. Creating engaging content. Well, first, let's see how we can make an impact. Impact is key, so your content doesn't blend in with the rest. I love this idea of creating short GIF-like videos. Cathay Pacific did an excellent job in really trend-jacking something that was incredibly popular and still is. So we know that we're staying indoors and everyone wants to actually exercise while they're indoors. So how did Cathay Pacific actually put a spin on this in their own way? They actually did an air marshal exercise, which is a really fun and playful way to get you thinking about their brand in a new light. So how you can create GIF-like videos is actually there needs to be an optimum length of 10 to 15 seconds, and you need to upload it in MP4 or upload it as a video file because LinkedIn does not support .gif files. And ideally, have the video loop 3 times and keep it really, really short and sweet. You don't need audio support, and the GIF will autoplay in mute in feed. So this is a fantastic piece of content that is helpful, practical, fun. You want to give it a go, and it gets you thinking about Cathay Pacific adapting to these COVID times. Another thing that you can consider is really, how do you get emotional with your audience? How do you show and share your compassion as a brand? And this is such a great way to be human. Tourism Australia really took a very different approach, especially on a professional platform. Take this time to daydream. We don't also necessarily need to be very practical or very productive at this time. How can we take this time to daydream and hopefully see them soon? So you can actually leverage video or carousel to showcase any emotion or compassion. Speak to your audience as you would a friend. Although this is a professional environment, you can still speak to your audiences or your customers as you would any other person, because your audience are people too. Next, we want to be helpful. How are we actually being practical for our audience and staying top of mind? Marina Bay Sands did an excellent job showcasing just this, and this was actually an organic post. So although maybe your marketing budgets could be minimized or cut entirely, you can still create content that can be posted organically. And they did a beautiful job with these multi-image posts. It's incredibly lightweight and a great way to stay topical for your audience. So what Marina Bay Sands did is that they wanted to talk about what ethical or sustainable working from home looked like on Earth Day. So obviously Earth Day was happening, and they knew that everyone was working from home. So how do they actually combine these two elements to create incredible content? So they actually created this multi-image post where you can actually read it from left to right, and giving really helpful and useful tips in and around this topic. So my tips are for creating successful multi-image posts is each photo should have one takeaway, and you have to make sure the text is large enough for mobile and only use a maximum of 5 images. Now, Marina Bay Sands also created this great Travel From Your Couch series. So we've moved on from the Zoom background trend of key landmarks around Singapore, and now it's actually how do you travel virtually? This is incredibly on trend because a lot of galleries and museums are actually doing this right now, and even tourism boards too in various countries, is how do you actually experience otherwise an in-person experience but digitally? So they did it on an organic post, learning about Marina Bay Sands and also all the destinations there, so it stays top of mind. As soon as restrictions ease, you would actually want to go. And I love this piece of content as well from Cathay Pacific. They actually create mini brand moments. So how can you create mini brand moments in the comforts of your own home? Well, they did so with some of their signature cocktails and mocktails that you can actually get up in the sky. So they actually did these how-to tutorials of creating one of your favorite signature cocktails that you would otherwise experience from 30,000 feet right in the comforts of your own home. And the comments that actually came from this post were wonderful. It really showcased the brand affinity that some of their customers had, how much they missed flying with Cathay Pacific and that they can't wait to come on board once again. So think about also the positive brand experiences that you're creating during this time, because obviously your audience can't engage with your brand in person. So you can simply film tutorials for your audience and keep them under 30 seconds, and you must indicate each step with overlay text because you have to remember that the video auto plays on mute in feed. Now, another example from Kayak, which I really love, is they actually did 50% of what I would actually love to see here, because they're demoing or showcasing a new product feature that they rolled out and showcase how they innovated during this time of crisis. But I would have loved to have seen this actually as a video to walk me through this new feature that they have. And what they actually created was a feed or a feature on their website to help their audiences find future flights with either free cancellations or no cancellation fees. So a walkthrough video would have been incredibly effective to showcase this new feature, which is incredibly impactful. So you should actually think about how to use carousel or short snackable videos to show and not tell how your product and services are adapting during this time of crisis. And also, it's really important to remember the basics. You need to create killer copy. And what does killer copy look like? Well, it's very, very short and sweet. You have to keep it under 150 characters, otherwise you'll get the see more cut off. And also, make sure that you stick to a maximum of 3 hashtags in your post, because hashtags are actually a great way to draw attention to your copy because it's a keyword indicator, so you can see if it's relevant for you. You also need to start your content with a data point or a question that piques interest. I love this piece from Kayak, who run the world. Happy International Women's Day. That's a really punchy and beautiful piece of content right there. And also, you need to clearly articulate why your audience should care, not what you're offering. A lot of the time, our content is always talking about what we're offering. Again, let's go back to the benefits ladder. That's about product and customer functionality and benefits. We need to get to why our audience should care. Again, highlight the emotional benefit to the consumer. We also need to be visually consistent. Visually consistent in the sense of what EY is doing here. They actually have their trademark trapezoid across every single piece of content that they publish, but it just takes on different formats, which is incredibly impactful. They've created such a strong brand ID and an omni-channel experience that anywhere I go, whenever I see this yellow trapezoid, I know it's actually EY speaking to me. So how are you creating that brand consistency from organic and also across to paid? So to wrap up everything that we've covered during this webinar, when executing your content strategy, you must practice the fundamentals. Never lose sight of your customers' needs and your employees' needs. You always need to be checking in to see what the context is and also how they're communicating and how they want to be communicated to. You need to demonstrate trustworthiness and also showcase how you bring your brand values to life. Again, you can reach or go back to some of the content pillars and topics, ideas that we shared with you on how you can highlight this. Be supportive, human, and listen intently, and always be mindful of tone, timing, and delivery. Again, your messaging needs to adapt and change just as quickly as this crisis is unfolding. And also, look forward while keeping your finger on the pulse. What does your next step in your communications or your content strategy actually look like? And some final words before we conclude this webinar. We need to remember that people forget what you say, but they remember how you make them feel. And this ties back to the benefits ladder. We need to make sure that we are tapping into the emotional benefits of what our consumers actually need and feel during this time of crisis, not just pushing our products and services in a very brand-centric way. And with that, we would love to open the floor to questions. We'll be answering some of your questions that you shared with us in the chat, and also we would also love to get your feedback. If you can please participate in a 2-minute survey so we can hear from you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking to you about some of our thoughts on how we can handle a crisis and develop content strategies for you in the travel and tourism industry. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. I hope you enjoyed that session. I'm going to take the last 5 minutes of our webinar to answer some really awesome questions that I enjoyed receiving throughout the session. So I think the first question that I've really liked and would love to answer would be, how is LinkedIn helping protect members from being exposed to fake content? This is a really important question, especially for our times. LinkedIn actually has human editors that really mine through all of the content that comes across our platform. And we also actually have a very strong security threshold to look for fake profiles so they don't post any fake content across the platform. So going back to the human editor element, we actually have curated content. So the content that you see in the trending feed on your desktop news feed, that's actually all curated and put together by human editors, which I think is really important. And also, we do not allow any form of political advertising or advertising around any form of gambling across our platform. And we have to remember that LinkedIn is a place where people's bosses can see your content, and that can actually have negative effects on your job or your career. So when we think about how people use this platform, it's usually just a very clean environment, because your profession is potentially at stake, or your role. So a lot of people tend to behave a little bit better and make sure that the content there is of value. So I hope that answered that question, and this is also how we differ from other platforms as well. The next question that I have is, will we change the way we approach content post-COVID? Yes, I think so. I mean, we have to remember that COVID is changing so many different parts of our lives permanently. There is going to be this new normal, and we're already navigating through it. And I think there's going to be a new normal in marketing and creating content as well. And I feel that hopefully COVID is really going to push marketing in the purpose test, really understanding the purpose of that brand message and really engaging audiences in this way. And also, I feel, how do we create that customer-centric content? This is something that I've been speaking to many clients, big B2B companies, saying you need to humanize your content, and nobody has really been able to grasp that very well. I'm hoping that COVID will be the opportunity in marketing that will create more audience-centric content and more human content, and this is how I feel that our approach to content will change post-COVID. And then I think we'll have one last question for today. So, should content on LinkedIn be different from content on other platforms? And I think this goes back to one of the slides that I shared during the presentation, which was each platform has a different sense of audience intent. Audience intent, people come to those platforms for different reasons and as a different kind of outlet. So I think whenever you craft a piece of content, be very mindful of, okay, is this content meant for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and why? Where is it going to resonate more? What does your audience look like? Because also your audiences on each platform are going to be different, so your content is going to resonate differently. So I do strongly suggest having differentiated content per platform, so you can ensure that your content will drive value and engagement and get you the results that you want. So on that note, I think we are at time with questions. Thank you so much for having me today, and I really hope you enjoyed the presentation as much as I enjoyed having you here.